Hi, I'm Tomas Cortez. Remember that in HRpreneur, we will talk about entrepreneurship, culture, diversity, equity and inclusion, digital transformation, agility, innovation, and all those things transforming the talent in organizations and, therefore, people's lives. So, do not forget to fasten your seatbelt because on this journey, we will travel beyond our limits and rationality with a profound exploration of our higher purpose. I hope this episode helps you develop new ideas and well-being for everyone around you. Hi, HRpreneur community. We are here with Judy Ellis, who is our expert or DEI at AMS. And well, we are going to spend some time. It's an amazing pleasure to kicking off this second season with HRpreneur. And well, we are going to discuss special topics during this amazing journey with different guests that we are going to have in our different sessions. But at this moment, well, it's a pleasure that Judy Ellis accept the invitation to connect your experience with this amazing community. And I appreciate your time, Judy. I'm sure our audience will enjoy the episode where we will discuss DEI strategy, but well, use a sneak peek because we will have specific issues about DEI to share with them in the future. And I want to share with the audience that this episode, which, as I mentioned, kick off the second season of HRpreneur, where we will broadcast great topics with you and other dear colleagues of AMS. But a little bit introduction before to start, Yuri, about AMS. Well, just to mention that AMS is a global total workforce solution firm founded in 1996, and we enable organizations to thrive in an age of constant change by building, reshaping, and optimizing workforces. And you can contact Judy and me to share more information if you want to know more about AMS. And then we will share more about connecting with AMS and at the end of this episode. But before we start, let me introduce you to our audience. And well, Judy Ellis is the Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory with AMS. Judy's expertise was built on Fortune 50 career in finance and corporate communications, followed by DEI and culture consultant for 20 plus years. Okay, in addition to her corporate career, Judy developed and taught a workforce diversity course for the University of Cincinnati's Masters in Applied Psychology program. Well, I think that I have mentioned a summary of all your amazing credentials, Judy, but could you add any others? I just remember that I should have said to our audience, or would you like to add something more about AMS, the company where you and I work?
Thank you, Tomas. I'll just add that I enjoy leading our global DEI practice, and it really pulls on my experience as a DEI practitioner and an organizational consultant. And having a global team of consultants in our advisory practice, including you in many regions, allows us to have the kind of regional nuance that's necessary when supporting companies in their DEI practice. And we may talk more about that later, but having that cultural understanding is really one of the important things that I love about working in this arena.
No, thanks, Judy. Thanks, Judy, for this time to share with this amazing community of HRpreneur. But before taking action on DNI, well, I'm going to start to the questions that we prepare for this community. But before taking action on DEI, defining each term is essential. And Judy, could you provide insights about the definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion for our audience? I remember a fantastic analogy in one of your workshops that you share with with some people at that moment?
Yes, I really like thinking about it, and I didn't coin these phrases, but with diversity is a fact, because it really is talking about the range of individual differences that exist among people. And it includes things, but isn't limited to age, gender, race and ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, gender, representation, disability, socioeconomic background, and in many ways, this in a corporate context means that we're creating a workforce that reflects the communities in which a company operates, as well as the customers it serves. And it's a numerical measure that we can look at. What is our representation of various employee groups in our organization? So that's why we say diversity is a fact. Equity really speaks to an action, because that's the process of ensuring that everyone has access to opportunities and resources regardless of their individual differences. So that means we are doing things like identifying and addressing systemic barriers that may prevent certain groups from having equal access to opportunity or resources. In a corporate context, this means promoting fairness. It means at times supporting one particular group with what they need to succeed, which might be assistive technology for someone with a disability, like a screen reader, if they have a visual impairment, so that you have real fairness in hiring, in promotion, and in compensation practices, that you're giving each person what they need so that they can succeed. Inclusion, that last term you mentioned, is really more of a feeling. And it talks about the employee experience, because this is where you've created an environment where everyone feels valued, respected, and supported, and able to speak up and be relied upon for their expertise, including bringing their diverse perspectives and ideas. And it's ensuring that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate and contribute. Again, in a corporate context, this means we've fostered a culture that has a sense of belonging for all employees, and where they all feel empowered to share their opinions and be their authentic selves.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for sharing that different terms that it's so essential to understand at the beginning when we are creating a DEI strategy. And with these great insights into understanding the difference in those critical terms, Judy, but something that I have seen in several types of research, that HR leaders and the board are unsure where to start regarding DEI, although it is a high priority and more in these times. Please help us understand what is happening and your recommendations to take the first step.
Yes, and this is common for many of the organizations we support in many regions, that they are just beginning a real concerted effort to incorporate DEI into their workplace practices. And a good place to start is really developing a DEI vision and strategy, so that you have a clear understanding of why DEI is important for your particular organization and what outcomes you hope to achieve. So this might be specific goals around increasing representation of a particular marginalized group in leadership positions. It might be improving workplace culture, which you can measure through employee opinion surveys that you look at and slice by demographic group. Or it could be a focus on creating more equitable policies and practices if you know you need to have improvement there. And I'll add that one of the ways to do this is by conducting a DEI assessment of your organization's current state. And this might include everything from reviewing your demographic data, which for many companies, that's difficult because step one may be turning on the ability to capture demographic data. Some of our clients in certain regions have different laws in place. However, they don't always use all the functionality that they can, even applying to their local laws. So they may have an ATS where they aren't even letting candidates self-identify or capturing employee data. Some start with gender and adding other dimensions of diversity. So that might be a first step as well. And once you have that data captured, you're then able to make data-informed decisions based on who your candidate or employee population is. And you'll be able to start seeing what picture is painted of your organization once you know what the data is and you have that feedback about employees. You can also add sentiment surveys like employee opinion surveys to learn from employees about their experiences and perceptions. That's often some of the work that we do with an organization, whether they're starting or later in their maturity, to help them understand who their populations are and how their perceptions of employees are coming through.
Thanks. Great start for the companies to know where to start with the DEI strategy with this experience that you have been done or doing with different companies. But I have also seen that some companies try to implement something that has worked for others. So please help us to understand if there is a general roadmap to accomplish the DEI strategy, or what you recommend to HR leaders or board of directors to cope with this critical duty.
Yes, it's common that we kind of say, what's the flavor of the day? And see companies following each other. But you really are better served to customize your plans to fit your region, your culture, the mindsets of your organization and your individual goals. And if you've begun doing the things we talked about earlier, you may also then create an internal DEI task force or committee, because having a dedicated group of leaders and employees allows you to have a group that can really help develop and implement your DEI strategy and give it the kind of cultural and regional nuance that is necessary. So you would include people from Brazil, for example, and Mexico and Peru, if you're looking, so that you have the way of connecting with employees about what matters to them in their particular area. Because what matters in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I live, and those dimensions of diversity could be extremely different, or they are different in many of the other regions that we serve. So using employees on a task force or committee to help really drive what's important to your organization can help with that issue or problem of just following what other people are doing.
Okay, thanks. There is not a recipe to create a DEI. I suppose that we have a general overview of what DEI, but it's necessary to really go into the specific situation that the companies are living to understand what is the better decisions to create that strategy. And definitely also amazing point of view, Judy. Something that blows my mind is when I also read this phrase or quote: if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. That is a quote from Lord Kelvin, also known as William Thompson, a physicist who theorized a whole new temperature scale that include absolute zero. But when I was reading in this quote, something that comes to my mind is how does this famous code apply to DEI strategy, and how can the HR leaders and stakeholders understand the better application of metrics around DEI? I know that you have good insights into the consultancy services that you have provide.
I think that it's very appropriate to think in terms of measurement when talking about DEI, because as we started at the beginning, if you don't know what your issues are, you definitely can't get to your root causes and have solutions that address them. So measurement is extremely important in this arena, whether it be starting with capturing candidate and employee data, as I started talking about earlier, so that you understand and you're having a push for candidates to self-identify themselves with their important diversity dimensions, and you're having employees tell you why that's important is so you can see where your strengths are, but you can also see where the gaps are. And so for many of our clients, starting there, they're able to see, oh, we have a lot of our population that is women, for example. And so we may want to consider looking at policies that may impact their desire to join our organization, or we may want to be more forward in our communications with employees about flexible work and other things that often may matter to a particular employee group. In terms of other metrics that are really important, when we're doing diagnostics of organizations, we start with talent acquisition, and we can look at the proportion of employees or candidates that are moving through what we call the talent funnel, from the beginning at attraction, what percentage of various demographic groups, men, women, are we attracting and applying for jobs? And are we at parity with what availability is in our market? And then we can look at every stage of the recruitment process in our organizations that are really data informed. And we can tell that candidates, for example, are progressing at proportionately the same rates through the initial screening for a job, through the interview process, if we have other tests or assessments, and then at the hiring decision. And we can look at each stage to see, are women getting through at the same rate as men? Are other populations getting through at the same rate? You can also look at retention data. That's important metric in DEI. Are you retaining employees from every population group at similar rates? So are your older workers being retained at the same rate as your younger workers? Do you have a problem, for example, at the senior management or manager level where employees are starting to drop off? I was talking with a client this week who expressed they were doing extremely well across the board with DEI up to their middle management ranks, but then they were losing a lot of their employees and weren't able to retain them, so they weren't advancing, which was causing problems in their diversity metrics getting up to senior levels. So looking at all those things, some of our more sophisticated clients are looking at internal mobility as well, looking at rates to promotion, for example. Are all employee populations progressing at the same rate? It may take 5 years, for example, for a white male to be promoted to a certain level, but maybe takes 10 years for the average woman to be promoted to a certain level. So looking at things like years to level also gives you a sense for how equitable your processes are, or if there is some bias that could be creeping in. Finally, I will say, looking at performance data and performance ratings, are all groups rated similarly in performance? Because if you really believe there's, great talent across all groups, you should see kind of a bell curve for every group. But are some groups being rated lower than other groups in their performance in your organization? If so, that may be an indicator that you need to dive in and see why is it that a certain group, for example, has a net lower performance rating overall versus another group. So just some of the metrics that are important to look at, and it's why having a really good data analytics team can be like the right-hand person, so to speak, helping a DEI professional or an HR professional, because until you can dig in and look at your numbers, you don't know in actuality, objectively, how well your policies and practices are working for every employee population.
No, definitely. And well, quality data that you got from the diagnostic and then complement with the quantity data used to have that data-driven mindset into the decisions that the company could start thinking about how create that strategies. Well, I can imagine that. Well, it's a cutting edge strategy to improve the DEI actions through all the program in the strategy. Oh, amazing thoughts and information that you are sharing with our audience, Judy. But and you mentioned something about talent acquisition, and we know that, well, something that AMS perform very well is talent acquisition. But competition for diverse talent is fierce in a volatile labor market, and candidates scrutinize organizations' DEI efforts. One of the pieces of the puzzle of diversity recruiting to face DEI outcomes. Could you tell us more about diversity recruiting to make sure we have representation? Because we know that representation starts with recruiting, retention, and career advancement, as you mentioned in these examples with the data that we can use. But what strategies have you applied to suggest that companies evolve their recruiting practices?
I think, one of the things I enjoy about AMS is our very deep heritage in talent acquisition, because that's one of our core areas of expertise, that we really understand a lot of the user groups, so to speak, that are involved in talent acquisition, be it the candidate and the candidate journey, the TA leader, the recruiter on the ground and what their experience is like, as well as what hiring managers who use kind of the service of talent acquisition to bring candidates in is like. And what we see as moving from standard to best practice is that you start with your sourcing and attraction efforts being as robust as possible, so that you're bringing all the available talent out in the marketplace into your process, all the best available talent. And that could mean there are individual sourcing strategies that you want to imply. And for those of us in the kind of large scale recruitment space, we've broken up the responsibilities of a recruiter and a sourcer, which I'm sure many of your listeners are aware of. But not having come from talent acquisition directly, I was really impressed to learn how skilled we have people that are very, very well versed in the sourcing proposition. And sourcing is really scanning the market, which we have hundreds of sourcers around the globe that can scan the market to look for talent from wherever that talent may be. It may be passive talent that is not actively looking for jobs, but they have the skill to develop that candidate relationship, and they are reaching out to people for particular roles, and they are very aware when they have diversity expertise how to reach out to particular candidate populations. So there's also some of our talent partners that have technology that allows diversity sourcing to be turned on. So they can look in a particular region and say, of all the people with this kind of background in a 20-mile radius or 100-mile radius, who has this skill set? And it's really interesting to see it populate where you can see, oh my gosh, there's a lot more women, for example, that have this capability. And some of the technology is so sophisticated, you can dial up and dial down years of experience. Like if I wanted 7 years and I take it down to 5, how many more hundreds or thousands of candidates are now qualified to be considered for a role? So that is just one part of doing kind of forward-leaning work in this talent space. And then recruiters, we see them as the talent advisors that get the handoff once the candidates have been identified, and really helping your recruiting staff become real talent advisors to hiring managers, so they have some insight into the market. They're able to advise a hiring manager and say things like, is this competency really a must-have? Or could you consider someone with these skills that might be in an adjacent role? So do you really need someone with this kind of insurance background for an insurance firm, or could they come from banking and show that they have this financial or mathematical aptitude, and then maybe they could be considered for a role? So we're seeing forward companies really focus more on skills versus years of experience or credentialing, because there's a lot of ways to have the aptitude, for example, to do well in a technical role, but perhaps you don't need to have the exact same experience. So just talking about the sourcing and the recruiter role is one way, and I could go through 10 dozen other ways that you can really compete for talent by amping up and personalizing your process so that you are reaching out and then accommodating the needs of various dimensions of diversity in the marketplace.
No, thanks. Yeah, good examples that you share with us. And also something that I would like to add, another question around that is, well, we have seen that global companies are operating in countries where the initiatives of DEI can be slightly different from one region to other, because, well, some examples, Mexico, Brazil, or APAC, other region, not only countries, also regions. What are your suggestions for designing a DEI strategy that impacts the various locations where the company is running operations? It's harder to do that?
I think it's easier
Okay.
because and as we talked about earlier, that's where including employees from your various regional locations can be really important. Even though it's a boring thing to talk about governance, but setting up a steerco or committees for DEI that include leaders from various countries or employees from various countries allows you to serve your employees and meet your candidates in a way that is important for them, that's regionalized and localized. So even though you may have a global recruiting strategy, it's important to have it localized so that it's meaningful for the population in each geography. In APAC, for example, we're seeing that there's an increasing age diversity in the workplace, as across Asia, we're seeing people live longer and stay in the workforce even longer. So that is informing some clients that they want to do things to provide policies or services that meet the needs of employees. There may be more healthcare benefits or wellness benefits that meet those needs, for example. And of course, living in the Americas, race, ethnicity often has a really key component, especially in the US, for example, where we're often looking at Hispanic and Black participation in the workforce as very, very key. But in other regions, you don't have that same dimension of diversity. May not have much ethnic diversity in some countries. So if you have a focus on ethnicity and you don't really have much ethnic diversity in a country, that would be the wrong focus. So the focus should fit what your population, your customers or consumers, your employees or candidates are in your local region, and then you design your practices and policies to fit the context that you have. So it's been really rewarding working in this role, because I am able to be involved in projects in APAC that may have one focus, but then in EMEA, I'm working with an organization that has a totally different lens on diversity, versus even some countries in Europe that have very different focuses, for example. So using the employees in your organization to help you have that right lens that fits them is really an important part of DEI, so that it has the right cultural nuance and it really resonates in your culture.
Oh, amazing. Co-creation around all the DEI strategy to bring the employees to help the company to create that DEI strategy. Okay, well, we are so excited because we are walking through different questions, and also, well, so exciting to hear a lot of amazing examples. But we are almost at the end of this podcast. But well, I have a lot of questions to ask you. But in previous questions, we talk about diversity, recruiting, regarding the research that we have done. Recruiting and D&I are top priorities for CHROs and also the boards of directors. But how can they create alignment between these, and how can Judy help them to arrange the best strategy to implement in 2023? Could you please share with us some special secrets, but not all your special secrets?
Yes, I think, we were working on a document internally for something within AMS recently, and we were all in agreement that it's so important to have senior leadership involvement in a DEI initiative, and that is really where it starts, so that DEI is not a separate kind of add-on strategy, but it's part of the overall corporate strategy. Many organizations are putting DEI efforts under the ESG umbrella. Some are not. I think there's, benefits. You can do it either way. However, it is important, I believe, in any organization to have that commitment from the C-suite, because that is what drives alignment across the business. And while DEI initiatives for employees often are aligned with the CHRO, there are many other aspects to diversity, equity, and inclusion beyond the employee equation. So, for example, supplier diversity, that's a term very resonant in the US, I know, in North America. where increasingly more companies are having a concerted effort in their purchasing supply chain to ensure that they are doing business with companies that are certified women-owned or other underrepresented groups owned. So there, for example, I started my career at P&G, and they're a member of the $1 Billion Roundtable, which is organizations across the globe that have committed to spending $1 billion in spend with women, minority, and other underrepresented group owned businesses. And why this matters is because if we're not careful in watching our diversity spend, then it may, we may be leaving out certain populations that have the capability to scale with our businesses and serve us. So that is not clearly a CHRO issue. It's a purchasing supply chain issue. However, the C-suite needs to be aware of that so that there's alignment between what you're doing in the community, who you're serving, what you're doing with your supplier program, as well as workforce diversity or what you're doing with your people. So having those things joined up is important. Also, coming from an independent consulting background, I had a number of marketing clients, and the rise of ethnic marketing has made DEI in the marketing space very important. I was working with a particular client who was creating some advertising for a snack food, and they realized that they had a wasabi flavor. And some of the advertising, they had chopsticks and some other things that weren't aligned in the right direction. And if they had not had Asian employees who were involved in the marketing process, they were about to shoot some creative that was in the 7-figure range for a particular client that could have caused problems in the Asian community because their copy or their advertising was signaling something that wasn't appropriate. So having employees, they now have set up an ethnic marketing board in that advertising agency so that all their material has a final review before that board to make sure it has the appropriate cultural reference or regional reference that they need. So DEI can be, it's very broad. Of course, we're talking about talent, and that's our expertise, but it shows why it's important to have that C-suite responsibility, because it goes into very many different areas besides just the employee and candidate equation.
No, thanks for sharing those special secrets. I suppose that our audience will be so interested to hear more about those special, but well, that is something that maybe we could share in future podcasts, or maybe if you want to talk more about with Judy in other opportunities. Okay, and last question in relation with the DEI topics, because, well, we prepare some personal questions because it's part of the interaction in our podcast. But the last question with DEI, the topic that this 2023 is taking a high relevance is artificial intelligence. What are your insights about it, and how is artificial intelligence changing the DEI strategies inside organizations? Do you notice worries in CHROs or boards about the opportunities and threats? Is artificial intelligence leveraging the HR areas positively?
I do believe AI is helping us because it's automating the ability to automate a lot of processes and think through and customize, especially when it comes to talents or candidates. There are some projects underway that can really provide a more personalized experience for candidates with more efficiency. However, there are always concerns about bias in data, and AI systems are really only as good as the data they're trained on. If the data is biased or unrepresentative, then the AI system could perpetuate those biases. For example, if it's trained on data that's skewed towards certain demographics, it may result in biased decisions or disadvantage a particular group. So it's important that, we ensure that there's not a lack of diversity in AI development. They're often developed by teams that lack diversity, and that can result in biased algorithms. So ensuring our development teams are diverse and multiple perspectives are considered in the design and implementation is important. You can just Google, won't take you but a minute or two to see that there are some systems that were trained, for example, on a certain complexion to identify people, and it wasn't really trained to look at people that were darker complected. And so we need to make sure that our developers are being taught in their universities and programs how to mitigate against those kind of biases. And I really like the fact that we're moving towards, in a lot of countries, having real transparency around what is underpinning the AI, because it can be difficult to understand and interpret a really complex algorithm. And if the transparency isn't there, then you have difficulty addressing or even identifying any biases that there may be in the system. So ensuring that you have the ability to understand the data, understand how the algorithms are being written, and when it comes to talent, for example, making sure that it's not screening job applicants or favoring certain qualifications or characteristics that are only associated with a certain demographic. Otherwise, that could exclude qualified candidates from those underrepresented groups. And we're starting to see, particularly in the US, more and more local governments being involved in looking at AI. There's some legislation just in the state of New York that we're waiting to hear on, because they are trying to rule out using AI, frankly. And so we're sitting to wait and see what that is. And I think it's important for the public to be aware of these things and for us to have transparency so that we are able to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I don't like painting with a broad brush and just saying AI is bad and it's always biased, because I have not found that to be the case, that there are certain, with careful programming, it can really help with data selection. It can help with even monitoring and making sure there's transparency so that we can see what's happening behind the scenes, is the way to ensure that AI systems are really equitable and ethical.
Got it. Well, so hot topic to discuss, well, the coming years, I suppose, because, well, artificial intelligence is growing so fast during these years, and especially, well, we have heard a lot about that with this chat GTP things that, well, we start deploy another conversations around artificial intelligence. Oh, well, that all those are all the questions in relation with your experience in DEI strategy to implement in companies. But, well, this podcast also wants to offer a point of view of who is Judy Ellis, and would you like to know more about specific topics that we discussed in this podcast? And, well, I'm going to start with some personal questions to, these could be short answers. And well, I would like to know, how do you live entrepreneurship in your field of expertise?
That's a really important question for me, having spent 20 years and owning 2 independent consulting businesses. When I joined AMS, that was very important to me, that I was able to maintain some of the creativity and some of the ability to have that autonomy. And I love that I still have that in this role, because as we from advisory at AMS sit in our innovation function, because our organization understands that consulting services are often on the leading edge of what support we provide companies. So we may work on a project that's only worth 5 figures, for example, where other big deals are also being done as well. But that allows us to get in and work on projects that are very new and that may be cutting edge. And then that leads into, we can feed that back into our business and make it something that's scalable, that we can use across supporting many other global clients. So part of how I live entrepreneurship in my role is having that autonomy and ability to create and serve our clients, even on small projects that may seem not as scalable, but they're important and you learn a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I really admire your leadership, because I have the opportunity to spend some time with you when we met in Cleveland. And well, but something that I want to ask you, what has led you to create a profound inner transformation that you have been able to transfer to organizations, to break with the fears in which the human being sometimes stagnates?
I think for me, it's been my focus on being a continual learner, which I think I share with you. It's just a curiosity about people and systems and things. And that has really allowed me to evolve in my career. I've worked as in a number of roles. I started in finance at P&G, worked in HR, in inside recruiting for a short time before moving into corporate communications, and ultimately into DEI after working on a number of DEI projects. So I think having curiosity, being open-minded and flexible, and always learning. I'm always taking some online class or listening to podcasts or trying to find ways to enrich myself, and being able to bring that into work has allowed me to keep evolving and keep working on things that are really passionate to me. So being a learner and being curious versus being afraid is really important in the DEI space, because you often are dealing with attitudes, or sometimes some of these principles get out in the general public and they get politicized. And people walk on eggshells or are fearful about talking about them. And really, all I'm doing and my passion is to let every person that can have meaningful work, have purposeful work, and rise to the level of their ability, and removing barriers that may prevent people from either getting into the workplace or getting through and rising to the level that they're able to operate based on their skills and abilities is what I'm really doing. It's not political. It's just letting people do what they're best at and making sure we have a more equitable system so that people are able to do that, and there's nothing hindering or hampering them from doing so. So I guess that's what I would say allows me not to stagnate.
No, thanks. Thanks, Judy. Thanks. Every conversation that I have with you, it's a new learning from me. Thanks for share all with the audience also. Life is a full of challenge, but what has been your biggest challenge and what learning did you take?
It was hard for me to think about that because I've had a number of challenges in life. But I think one of the most critical career challenges for me was making the decision to move out of finance
Mm,
and into a more people space, so to speak, because a lot of my training and education was toward not as much toward the softer skills, and I had some beliefs about being in the line part of the business and how important that was. But part of my, I guess, personality and interests have always been more people centered. And so there was some internal struggle for me when I was rather junior at P&G, and I started looking up and realizing I don't think I want to be that when I grow up, so to speak. I don't want to be a finance director necessarily. And then it was kind of scary, like, well, what if there aren't other opportunities for me here to switch to another kind of role, or what if I'm too far in my career, which is funny now, but 5 years in as a newer person, to move functions seemed like an earth-shattering thing. But really listening to that compass inside of me about what really made me excited about waking up each day and what I enjoyed working on has been kind of what has driven the rest of my career. And I realized I could be, just because I had the aptitude for something doesn't mean I had the passion for it. And I had
mm,
the aptitude to do finance work, but I didn't really love it. But moving closer toward communication, org development, people systems, diversity, equity, and inclusion, I work on it way too much and talk about it and read about it because it's just something I'm passionate about. It's something I do, in my outside life, even if I'm not actually working, because I really love it. So that challenge of taking a risk and saying, I don't think, even though I've invested in this, I don't think I want to stay with this. I want to do something different, was a challenge that's paid a lot of dividends for me.
no, thanks for sure that. Well, I when you were talking, I remember a book that is called Flow. I suppose that you have heard about that, and well, resonate in my mind when you mentioned that when you are passionate about the things that you are doing in this space. Okay. Oh, we almost finished, but what is the best advice you got to break the status quo? What impact did it have it on your life?
I think it came from my dad, who said, don't be afraid to be in the minority because the majority could be wrong. um,
Mm,
and he used to tease us as kids and say, don't follow the crowd. If the whole crowd was lining up to jump off a roof, would you line up to jump off the roof with them? Meaning jump off the roof to your death. And it was kind of his way of saying sometimes the right thing may not be the popular thing, and you may be an outlier, but that doesn't mean your opinion may not be really important. And so that piece of advice, at times when I, don't feel as courageous, or I think I'm seeing this differently than everyone else here, which is often the case working in DEI,
yeah.
that your perspective is not quite what other people's perspective is. But, taking a step back, thinking about it, I'm not a contrarian, but just saying, I'm kind of seeing this a different way, kind of how I'm looking at this is X, and learning ways to use diplomacy, but still be courageous and speak up about things that really I see in a different way than the rest of the group is really the value that I bring often in my role. So it's not always comfortable because you're not
Yeah.
always having the popular opinion, but that's really the value that I can bring, is that I have a different perspective and an outside perspective that allows us in some places to see that way. And I like a policy for inclusivity or a practice is having someone on a team that plays the so-called devil's advocate. And their role is to say, all that we've come up with, Tomas, what do you see that we're missing here? And kind of changing who that person is so that you make it psychologically safe for people to disagree with the status quo. And when you have that kind of safety, that's where you have more inclusion. People are able to tell you more of what they see and the watch outs they have. But it impedes innovation when people don't feel empowered to raise their hands and say, I don't really think that's going to work, and here's why.
Yeah. Well, oh, amazing advice. For me, it's also so valuable to hear that. And the last, what do you think is your mission to grow organizations through a talent strategy, in this case with DEI?
I think I've probably shared it before, but for me, part of talent strategy is having every employee population and candidate population with the very best people able to do their very best work, and creating, if it be hiring systems that are as free of bias as possible, so that you are able to see the best talent that's in the market and bring them through, or whether it be working on your performance systems so that your best talent in your organization can rise and you're confident that that's what's happening, that it's not favoritism or tenure or people's affiliations that are helping them to move and progress through an organization. So really ensuring that you're looking critically and assuming that we human beings are not perfect and the systems we create are not perfect. So having your antenna out to look at ways that things may be impacting one population over another. That's a really important part of the strategy to make workplace equity happen.
Oh, thanks, Judy. Thanks. Amazing those learnings, topics that we hear from you and listen, from you. And well, I suppose that all this information that you are sharing with us will be so valuable for the people that are gonna or are listen this podcast at this moment. And well, I expect to have more time, to spend more time with you in future opportunities to talk more about specific topics of the AI. Judy, I appreciate the time you share with us about your knowledge also, and the other trending talent topics, and also your personal information or your personal discussions, questions, and answers that we share with the audience. And well, I'm so thankful that at the end of this podcast knew you more. And please let us know where the audience can reach you to be in contact with you.
Yes, I can be reached at Judy, JUDY .Ellis, ELLIS at weareams.com. That's WEAREAMS.com.
Okay, many thanks. Well, you listen, audience, that well, you can reach out Judy if you want to discuss something more, of if would you like to receive a guidance about the DEI strategy to support your new adventures with the talent in your organizations. Thanks again, Judy, and well, hope to see you again in future episodes here in HRpreneur.
Thank you so much, Tomas. I appreciate you reaching out and including me.
Remember to connect with me on LinkedIn as Tomas Cortez and on Instagram as Tomas H Cortez. And tell me what other topics you would like to listen to in the coming weeks. We wish that HRpreneur becomes a community where you can learn how to create a human-centric vision and at the same time, break the status quo. So please help us to achieve our purpose of inviting your friends to follow HRpreneur and to leave comments. Thanks for sharing your time with us, and we look forward to seeing you in our next episode to continue evolving.